The session, Girl in Scarlet Hijab, Suresh Kumar in conversation with Ananda Manike.
This fine evening where we are facing the sea and we are talking about a book called Girl in Scarlet Hijab. So, what makes this evening very fine and important is this is written by Mr. Suresh Kumar, a native of Cochin, who left Kerala way back in 1991 in pursuit of his profession to US. Now he is in New Jersey and he's a professor of entrepreneurship in New Jersey. But being there throughout in his life, memory flashed back to an incident that really happened way back in 1981 in Cochin, a story of what I would specifically say is a telling story about the heroism rooted in love, not in hatred, to honor the memories of unknown freedom fighters from all over the world. In fact, Mr. Suresh himself was involved in politics way back in during his college days, and in fact, he is a batchmate and a colleague of our respected opposition leader, Mr. V.D. Sadish. I hope you met him yesterday. I hope you met him. Okay. So before I go into a Q&A or before I go into analytics of this book, I just hand it over to you itself directly to Mr. Suresh. What all made you to think to pen down from your main profession when you were practicing as an executive, and just send me the flow of the events or which rooted from the start onward so that I can take the questions accordingly based on what you say. Please carry.
Thank you, Ananda. I first want to thank the DC organization KLF, especially CEO Mr. Ravi, who invited me for this. But I also want to thank one person who got me here on time today. That was my auto driver, Jamshuddin, because there is no other way I could have got here. The traffic was so bad. Only he got me in through this narrow ways, and he got me here exactly on time. So I want to thank him for this opportunity. This is my first time in any literary conference because it's my first novel too. So I want to give a shout out to some of my friends from Cochin, which is the Cochin Book Club. We have a couple of members here. Thank you for coming. Let me go back to the story. You asked me the question as to how did the story emerge over time. So the first spark of this idea happened about 40 years ago when I was in school. I had gone with my older brother. His name is Shashi Kumar. We had gone as volunteers to an event in which the great writer, speaker, Sukumar Arikod was speaking. Now, we went there just to have fun because we had our uncle being one of the committee members, etc. But after the event, after he finished speaking, we saw a long line of people waiting to meet with him. And in that line was this young girl who was wearing something that looked like a hijab to me. So that image of a writer, an elderly writer at the height of his fame, and this young unknown girl, maybe a teenager, not more than a teenager, wearing a hijab, is an image that stuck in my mind. Now, of course, you're not ready to write a novel or a story about this at 8th standard. So I put that thought in my mind, and I came back to it many times over the years. As I went through college, got my job, went to the US, etc. I brought that idea back, and I was thinking these two characters, older person, young girl, who could be a follower or who could be a fan or who could be, some kind of an influence, etc. So that forms the base idea of this book. These are the two characters. The girl in the hijab is of course the name of the book, so she emerges as the most important character. But the elder author, freedom fighter, also has a very important role in it. If I may just add, so what made me write the story now? About 3 years ago, I was going through a medical condition. I was having a blocked artery, so I had to go through this stent process. So as I was being prepared for that, it occurred to me that many of the stories that I grew up listening to or experiencing or seeing in Cochin that involved my parents and my grandparents, I had not yet told my son, who was only 12 years old, right? So, and at that time I was writing a non-fiction book. So it occurred to me that, that non-fiction is not that important. What is more important is that I tell stories that are close to my heart, that belongs to my people, that will connect my son to his grandparents. That is the reason that I took up this as a project. And I've been doing this for the last 3 years. It took me about 2 years just for the writing piece alone, and about 1 year with respect to finding a publisher, and now I'm just commencing marketing it. It was just released last month. So that's a whole journey. I hope that gives you an idea.
That very clearly gives a tone regarding how you set up into this thing. But you mentioned regarding the name of this book also. It's very unique. The book name is very unique. So I just wish to ask you two things. One, what really made you to name this book in this way, or where did you get that phrase? Second thing, you mentioned regarding your approach in writing this book, but can you still little more elaborate, because you mentioned regarding a medical background and all those things. These 2 points, can you just cover in a little more?
Certainly. So with respect to the name, Girl in Scarlet Hijab, it is because there was one such person who was a close friend of my brother. And my brother was a leader of the Students' Federation of India, SFI, in Maharajas College. I studied at Sacred Heart College, and I was actually on the KSU side with Sadish and Vidi. But my brother was a big influence on me. And he was a leftist leader, very fiercely dedicated to the party. And one of his friends was, among his circle of friends was this girl who, so I used her as a motivation, as an image to create that. So the story is that of a group of student revolutionaries who take on the government in the 1980s and 81, and after a series of events leads to the fall of the government in the following year. You asked me a second part of the question, writing. So when I decided to write this story after my heart incident I mentioned, the process I used was, I wanted to claim back some time. Challenge that most writers face in real life is, where do they find the time to write from? So the way I did it is that I took away about 3 hours of TV watching time at night, between 9 and about 11:30. I'm in the US, so I watched that almost religiously. I've been watching for the past 20 years. But when I looked at it, it was not that important. I can live without those TV shows. So I eliminated those 3 hours, and I used to write from about 9:10 when my family went to bed until about 2 in the morning. So that's my routine. I do not do it every day, but I did it like 2-3 times a week. In between, I did take like 2-3 days, and I traveled to another place where I could be all alone, away from the family, and I could just focus only on writing certain chapters. So this are the 2 major activities that I did for writing.
After reading this book to an extent, what I could gauge was, it is a mix of real events plus fiction, where in the real events you have covered many prominent real events with respect to Mahatma Gandhi, Jayaprakash Narayanan, Vaikam, even our Chief Minister E.K. Nayanar.
Yeah.
So with respect to the name of this book and the content, Is this an historical fiction, or how do you wish to elaborate on that?
So that's a good question, because as a writer, when I'm telling a story that is close to my heart, I'm not really concerned about whether it belongs to a particular genre, is it a history or a historical fiction, etc. The second aspect is, when you look at history, a lot of history that we know is not really true, right? Because it was told by someone who maybe was in charge or had the power at that point of time. So a lot of the history that is already out there is been now proven by people like Manu Pillai and others that it is not true. The real history is something else completely. So therefore, I think it is just a classification, a false classification, whether a story belongs to one particular genre or something. It is usually the publishers that do that work. For marketing purposes, they put it as a particular thing. But as far as I was concerned, this was a story inspired by real events, and having a lot of real characters. The only fictional elements were the plot itself. Some characters and some plot elements are fictional. Many of the other things are real.
Before I go on to the next question, when you talk regarding this book, can you just little more elaborate in concise regarding some ins and outs of this book, so that we can take up some questions also from the audience, in brief or in detail, wherever you wish to be specific.
Sure. So one of the motivations for me,
With respect to the story, because it's a mix of what I read, I told you,
So I'll narrate a few important incidents from history that I've used or incorporated into my story. First one was, and most of you already know this, in 1925, Mahatma Gandhi visited Vaikam, mainly to stand in solidarity with the lower caste Hindus, for them to gain rights into the temple entry, right? So, but what is not so well known is that inspired a lot of people, including famously Vaikam Mohammad Bashir, who was a young boy at that time, to get involved. And he actually went to northern India after meeting with Gandhi. He was a very small boy, so he just kind of had a brief interaction with Mahatma Gandhi, but that prompted him to go, took part in the freedom struggle, and then he came back and he became a great writer. Similarly, many other leaders were also inspired by that visit. So I used that. Then I used in 1942, when after Quit India movement happened, that happened in August, and almost all the major leaders of the National Congress were in jail. So at that time, things looked very bleak for the Indian independence movement. But at that time, in November, just 2 months after Quit India, there was an escape from jail called Hazaribagh in Uttar Pradesh. A very high security British jail. The leader, who was then called, he's called Jayaprakash Narayan by full name. Now we know him as JP. So he and 5 of his associates escaped from the jail, and they went and formed an organization called Azad Dasta, which stands for the Freedom Brigade, and that was in the jungles of Bihar. So that happened, and what I discovered after I did more research into this, that there were people from all over India, including people from southern India. I also traced that there was at least one person from Kerala in that group, based on my research. So I used that incident also. I've incorporated that event, then I've incorporated a few other events. I also wound this around in 1980-81, where the E.K. Nayanar government takes on some student protests, and then it leads to the fall of the government. So I wove my story around these events that are kind of already well known. There's one more incident I may want to just briefly mention. Again, relatively unknown. There was a mutiny in 1946 by the Royal Indian Navy that took place in Bombay. where about few hundred sailors took down the British flags from 60 ships in the harbor and put up the Indian flags, the National Congress, Communist Party, and the Muslim League flags. So that was all done in great coordination, completely surprised the British. And they held the Bombay port for a period of 3 full days. Unfortunately, the National Congress and other leaders did not back them, so they had to surrender. But that was one important incident that led to British leaving in the next year. In 1947, British left because they knew that they cannot survive in India for a long time. That also had multiple Malayali sailors. My dad was also a sailor in one of the ships. So I have heard bits of this, but I've never read about this in the history texts. So therefore, I wanted to highlight these important incidents. I want my son, I want every young Indian to learn about these things. And what I felt is they will learn about this only if it is part of an interesting story. They're not going to pick up a fiction book and read it. So therefore, if I tell it in the form of an interesting story, it will hopefully interest them and they will do more research and learn more about it.
Interesting when you talk more. You're talking about the freedom movement, the fight against mutiny. The book is mentioned about a heroism rooted in love. When I read about a character called Ruxana, who is a main person. So, all different levels mix. I don't know how you united all these things. The freedom fighting, the loving character Ruxana. The book is totally rooted. It's interesting to know more. How did you club all these things and sandwiched all these things? Can you just give a, because I asked that question primarily with respect to when you mention all these things. What is the primary goal of this book? What is the primary aim of this book when you wrote? Because you mentioned regarding all this things. Can you just elaborate on that thing?
So when you ask, let me answer the question in a little different way. Whom did I write it for? I just mentioned that I wrote it for, my son was one of the primary motivations for me. But I also had my mother alive when I started writing the book. And she is one of the characters, she inspires one of the characters in this book. So I also wanted to write it in a way that will capture essence of her personality when I bring her into the story, so that somebody else who would read it would say that, yeah, that is your mother. She would have done that exactly. So I also wrote it for her. So between my son and my mother, there is a big difference of almost 85 years apart in terms of age. Sorry, 75 years difference between my son and my mother, who he was passed a couple of years ago. So in that sense, I'm actually writing it for anybody who's interested in learning about their history, right? Irrespective of age. You could be young, you could be old, but if you want to reconnect with your roots, and how do you pass that on as to these big events, these great heroes were actually not fictional, they were real people who did real things. Jayaprakash Narayan, and Mohammad Bashir and people like that who accomplished great things were actually real people. We don't have to look for superheroes. I know it's a craze now that books of superheroes are very popular, but we have those superheroes already amongst us, right? Who some of them still living. So my goal was to highlight that aspect.
The superheroes of this book. You mentioned regarding a lot of characters in that thing.
Yes, so I'm saying the ordinary people who have done extraordinary things, but who are not as popular amongst the young people these days.
As the young people. Yeah. So that is what you mentioned, what you thought of highlighting as a goal of this book?
Well, that is one of my personal goals.
Okay.
But each reader may take something different out of it.
Yeah, that's why I asked, because when I read, I found it, one chapter was fiction, one chapter was a loving story, the other chapter was something else different. So it's a sandwich between all of these things. That's why I mentioned.
It is, and I just want to mention that feedback I've got, like yesterday, I was there at a book signing where about 10 all young girls came to sign because they are inspired by Ruxana's character.
Yeah, that's what I asked.
So it was not, I was not intending it that way, but they took it, they were inspired by her role, and some of them have already read the book, and they found that character more interesting. So
Good. Before I move on to the other question, you have some friends from Cochin Book House. If is anybody interested in taking one or two questions before I move on to the other question? Yeah, you can. Yes, we can stand with you. Carry on, please.
So I wanted to ask, since you wanted to transmit some of your knowledge about historical events to your son, that is one of the primary motives for your writing the book. Why did you choose to write fiction? The other option that you would have had is also non-fiction. So what is the reason that you chose to go for the fictional mode to tell the story?
So when you say historical fiction, it is based on real events. I cannot change the real events that happen. I've got to be true to the timeline of events that happen. Right? For example, when we say mutiny of the Royal Indian Navy, that happened on a particular time frame. The fall of the Nayanar government happened on an exact date. So I have to build my story around it. Why did I add fiction to that? It is because that will make the plot more compelling, right? Otherwise, it is difficult for history itself may sound a little dry. But if you add the fictional plot to it, then it becomes interesting to younger readers. So that was the reason why I thought historical fiction may be the right path for me to take.
Okay, even said so, another interesting thing is you have been living in US for nearly 30 plus odd years. So your book is really an expression of the deep love with respect to an event, what you see in this love for India and especially of your hometown. Okay. So how did you maintain this close bond living in America for 30 years and how did you manage all these things?
So I think the most important thing is that I grew up in Cochin. So I was there for about 27 years and I walked every street. I took every bus, school. I learned whatever I had to know in life from Cochin, right? People take this mistaken impression that you suddenly go to US and you become successful. Actually, it all starts here in Kerala. And that's why I recommend students who wants to go overseas to study now, I tell them, study here, work here for some time before you go overseas, because this is where you learn stuff. But how do I maintain the connection? It was because I came back at least once every year. And I was here, usually I come for about a month's time. I spend time, I keep very close touch with what's going on, the news, the people. So that gives me that intense connectivity to what's going on. But also when I visit, I make it a point to watch people and events very closely. So for example, if I go to an event, I talk to multiple people. When I'm in an auto, I talk to the driver. When I get off and I go to a hotel, I talk to the staff. I ask them about their life, etc. So that way I've been closely in touch with what's going on. Right.
Before going to the final question, one penultimate question what I wish to ask. Is anybody else having a question so that, or should I, is anybody else having one question? Okay. One penultimate question what I just wish to ask you is, we mentioned it is even the book is a mix of an event, fiction, all those things, so sandwich between all those things. How do you wish this audience should take the best takeaways of this book in terms of all the three combined? Because it is a mix of history is there, fiction is there, story of heroism is there, heroism rooted in love. What would be a few takeaway points what you wish this audience should have or how they should take? Can you just have a brief thing?
So as the writer, actually it is difficult for me to have or give you suggestions as to what you should take away from the book. That I think is completely up to the writer, to the readers. Because I've met a few hundred people that I've met over the last few weeks at events, smaller events. The feedback has been very, very different. Some people like different aspects of it, the history aspects of it. Somebody like a certain twist in the plot. Somebody likes a certain character much more than. In fact, there are many who likes the character I built after my mother's role more than the heroine. So it is difficult for me to actually predict or even suggest that this is what you should take away from the book. I think that depends a lot on the reader's background, what their mental and emotional makeup is. But I think the important thing is that, as far as I'm concerned, this is an expression of my love for India, my close attachment to Kochi and Kerala, and therefore this is my way of passing on knowledge that I had to the next generation of people. So that's what I've done. Now readers may make whatever it is, but as long as they also perhaps engage with it and pass on that to the next generation, that would really be, that would be what I would desire as an outcome.
You moved to US. You were having a very high profile job. All those things, your affection for the country, all is accepted. But when did Mr. Suresh Kumar realize that there is a writer in you? Okay, all of us are having memories regarding many events, many stories, but we only have a flash of that thing in memory. We don't write it down. When did Mr. Suresh Kumar realize that there is a writer in you, and what really prompted you to write this book? Can you just set that context in your mind and just give clarity?
Sure. So I would say a series of events that I recall distinctly that made me curious to become a writer was meeting Shashi Tharoor in New York. At that time, I had just arrived in New York from Cochin, and knowing that he's the Under Secretary General of the UN. Plus, at that time, he had just started his writing career. He was getting famous. He was not as famous as he is now. So he was accessible. He used to come to events. I was the president of an organization called the Network of Indian Professionals. So we used to invite him to come and talk about his book. So I got many opportunities to meet him. And I was quite taken in by, he was a very charming man even back then. And there were women all around him wanting to get his signature, have a chat with him, etc. So he inspired me, and of course some of his books were also quite thoughtful and influenced me in terms of, I thought maybe this is something that I would like to do too. And that may be maybe 10, 15, 20 years down the line. Now, life came in the way, so I was not able to do anything until 3 years ago. And that's when, and frankly, it was that incident, that medical condition I mentioned, that jarred me to reality that if I don't write a book now, then maybe it'll never happen. So I would say, by the way, in addition to Shashi Tharoor, there was also many other Indian writers who emerged at that time, including Jhumpa Lahiri, Anita Desai, Rohington Mistry, etc. There were a bunch of such writers who started coming out in the 1980s and 2000s. So all of them, their fame and popularity, and some of them were telling stories that were very Indian, right? And they were successful in the US by telling Indian stories. So that was one of the things that motivated me that, okay, there is a audience for good stories, whether it's in India or in the US. So that was one of my inspirations.
Gratitude to you for giving us the permission to have a in-depth deliberation regarding this book. Mr. Suresh is available here till day after tomorrow. You all can have a personal interaction with him either in the book signing lounge or wherever it is. Grateful to you, KLF, for enabling this session. Thank you all, audience. Because of paucity of time, we are stopping out of here. Thank you all. Thank you.